Film Club.
Thank you for joining us for another episode of Film Club. I'm one of your hosts, Andy Harrison, and with me, as always, it's Andy Donaldson.
Hello.
Every week in Film Club, we invite you along to watch a film with us, and this week we're taking a look at James and the Giant Peach.
We have young James Trotter, kind of orphaned young kid, brought up by his horrible aunts, and he's basically a slave to his aunts, right? And all he wants is he wishes for a good future. He wishes to have friends. And he meets a peculiar man who has these peculiar worms, these dragon or crocodile tongues, what they're called. And it suddenly grows on his age-old tree this massive peach. He runs away from his aunts inside the peach and discovers a load of giant insects that become his friends. He has this massive adventure across the sea, across the air, to the Arctic, or the Antarctic, sorry, and eventually ends up in New York, which is always his dream, because that's where his parents went. And it's another collaboration of Henry Selick and Tim Burton. In this case, Tim Burton produced, Henry Selick directed. And this is always one I really remember because the absolute incredible usage of live action and animation. That wonderful scene where James is crawling through the tunnel into the peach and suddenly transforms into the animated James. It's reminiscent of Alice in Wonderland, where she goes from inside the door to Wonderland, and the colour comes in because we have the difference of vibrancy of colours. And it's a really fantastic film to revisit because this was 1996. Yeah, 1996. And it holds up really, really well. How did you think of it?
Yeah, so we mentioned this last week a little bit with The Nightmare Before Christmas often getting accredited to Tim Burton, and I think Henry Selick often gets a short end of the stick on that one. I think with James and the Giant Peach, you can see a sort of refinement of that style. A lot of the design that goes into the world of James and the Giant Peach is very similar to what goes into The Nightmare Before Christmas, where everything's a little bit gothic. Things are crooked. Like his fireplace, for example, is completely off kilter. Everything on the hill is sort of wonky and unrealistic. And they make sure to do everything on a soundstage, which gives it this heightened reality. Whether they're on the hill, whether they're on the beach, or whether they're over in New York, none of it's shot on location. Like New York is this funny little like single street, miniaturized version of New York where it feels a little bit sort of Polly Pocket-esque. Everything's sort of micro scale. And I think that Roald Dahl obviously has this just incredible lineage of creative examples of how to tell children's stories. And each one of them feels so unique in lots of ways. The ideas in it are absolutely fascinating. Like I'd love to sort of find out more about the concepts and where they come from and like why a giant peach. And a lot of that stuff is very sort of whimsical and very appealing to children. This really holds together. I agree that the animation style is absolutely astounding. I think that it's an incredible example of stop motion animation.
Yeah.
I think that narratively, I have to admit, I was pretty bored during this film. It's quite a simple A to B.
Yeah, I must admit, and I was saying this to our girlfriend, on revisit, whilst I did enjoy it, I didn't enjoy it half as much as I remember when I was a kid. But what you brought up there with regards to Roald Dahl is initially he didn't want this to go out and film. He was reserved the rights. I think it was his widow, his wife, who gave the rights away, and eventually Henry Selick that got them and retrieved them, I think, at the production studio. But what was wonderful about Roald Dahl's work, and he said there, everything's unique, he's got an extensive imagination, is we looked at Matilda a few weeks back, with Danny DeVito directed. It's very whimsical as well, but look at the difference in those styles of film. It's this wonderful imagination that we have of Roald Dahl that we're actually seeing in film. It's wonderful to see this imagination come to life. And I don't think it's something I truly appreciated as a child. Whereas now, it's more like, holy shit, for Henry Selick to actually take on this project of that absolute chaotic nature of Roald Dahl's work and to see that come to fruition. Like, how the hell do you do something where there's a peach flying in the air with a fence going around it, being pulled by seagulls with a shark chasing it? Like, that is absurd. And yet he managed to do it.
He realizes it all so well. I think it's easily the best thing about the film. Like the aesthetics of it is absolutely impeccable. I love the design of every single one of the creatures. And even animated James himself. I think animated
Yeah.
James has a fantastic look to him. There's a tactility to everything. I think there's even sort of slight design nods in the worm, which is a very simplistic design. The more complex ones, like the centipede, are very, very well animated, very expressive
Yep.
in the way they're able to actually communicate things to each other. And he's even been bold enough to write songs to make it into a musical. I always thought it was interesting how some of the scenes have been sort of chopped up and changed and swapped around. Like,
Yeah. I think they amalgamated some characters, didn't they?
yeah, so some of the bugs aren't around. The big one for me was always that I remember reading the book and absolutely loving the scene where they went above the clouds and met the people that lived on the clouds and made weather. And instead, the film adapts that to being them going underwater and finding the compass, which,
Yeah.
funny enough, I mean, we've just done Nightmare Before Christmas last week. There's a lovely little wink and a nod and a cameo with Jack Skellington, the Pumpkin King himself, appearing as the pirate.
Yeah, it's good, that, isn't it? It's a nice little reference, that.
And I think the funniest thing about it is the centipede opening the door and going, "Oh, a Skellington."
I'd like to point out as well, which I'm sure you agree with, is the really great voice acting that they have, to the extent of even the singing voice. Like, for example, I never knew this, but the earthworm is David Thewlis, and he delivers a stunning performance of anxiety. But this is just David Thewlis just having the time of his life, just being terrified of everything. And, you have these great other characters. Susan Sarandon, who's perfect as, Miss Spider. You have Simon Callow's Grasshopper, Richard Dreyfuss as Centipede. You have these wonderful casting. You even have, as Ant Sponge and Spikey, you have Miriam Margolis and Joanna Lumley, who just deliver exceptionally as the evil ants. Or they are evil. It's this almost kind of like stellar cast that I didn't expect. Even the singing as well. I don't think the music's as good as The Night Before Christmas. I think whilst Randy Newman is great, I don't think it works in the same way Danny Elfman works, because the lovely whimsical nature of Elfman's music really helped to elaborate the kind of lyrics. And I think, for what it is, it's brilliant. A really great example, Paul Terry, who plays James. I don't think he's done much, and you could tell there's a couple of parts, and he's doing that song at the start where he goes, I'm James, I'm James. He's not perfect in his singing, but it truly represents being a young kid and singing along and just having those lovely songs that you have as a kid to your own imagination. He's singing to Miss Spider, and I really, really love that particular performance. And I think it really encapsulated what it's like to be a young child, especially one who, lives and breathes through imagination because he's got nothing else. He's in a shitty room.
Can I be the grump? I hate Paul Terry. I think
It's all right.
awful.
It's all right. It's imperfect. It's imperfect.
Yeah,
it is imperfect.
It is, and there's a lot of charm to the imperfection. And I think when I was a kid, I didn't care so much. Rewatching it now, I can't wait for him to become animated. And even then, I think he's a better voice actor than he is an on-screen actor. And that song for me was ruined by him. But there's definitely a sort of natural innocence to it that you can't deny. But we can't, if we're talking about performances, we're talking about the actors, we're talking about everybody involved, we can't ignore the fact that just a couple weeks ago we did Brassed Off, and here we have Pete Postlethwaite again, just gorgeous as ever.
Yeah, he's. I didn't realize he had the same accent as well, and I was like, oh, this is quite nice. He's coming there with his magic beans or the equivalent, and he's obviously narrating the story throughout. Obviously Matilda, we had Danny DeVito had been narrating the story, but yeah, it's a lovely little bit of screen presence and audio presence as well, and yeah.
So I think on the whole, for me, James and the Giant Peach is a really astounding sort of adaptation. I think that its visual design is gorgeous. I think that the way in which they were able to present such complex animation and also to have the bravery to experiment a little bit with the material and with the actual format. I love that section where they also do a little bit of 2D animation. They mix up the animation style a little bit.
Yeah, the use of the smoke coming out and the use of stop motion, they do mess around with quite a few different animations. It's brilliant.
I think that it's got a lot of creativity in it. As a story, this is not something I'm excited to watch again, if I'm honest. It's a film that I really struggled with as an adult, which is a shame because some of other Roald Dahl adaptations, like you mentioned earlier, Matilda, particularly fantastic Mr. Fox, and even Willy Wonka, I love those still as an adult. And I think that James the Giant Peach, for me, doesn't have the narrative depth and the narrative complexity that the other work does.
Yep.
But I do think there's a lot to enjoy aesthetically.
Yep, completely agree.
So there is James and the Giant Peach. You can let us know in the comments below what you thought of the film. But Andy and I are going to be back once again next week, where it's time to take a look at the Banshees of Inisherin.
Cheers, guys.
Until then, get watching.